That's why I'm passionate about this. That's why it's so freaking exciting to see, can we create something better? What we're building here is like Ozempic, but with food. These drugs, Ozempic and the like, they are satiety hormones, satiety drugs.
Correct.
And what we are building is a simple way to eat higher satiety foods. So instead of satiety drugs, talk about satiety foods.
Welcome to another River Rock interview. Today we have Dr. Andreas, who is the diet doctor, the starter of the biggest low-carb website in the world, who has a new project, the Hava Satiety app, to come talk to us about. And he's a family doctor from what I understand. Glad to have you on. I'm excited to talk about all the projects here.
Thanks, Hakeem. It's good to be on.
Yeah, my pleasure. I think my first question for you, actually, something we briefly mentioned just before coming on here, was what is the Hava app? What's that about?
Yeah, so I mean, like you mentioned in the interaction, been really into low carb and basically eating better for more than 20 years. I think it's such a fascinating topic. I mean, as doctors, we're doctors, both of us, and we get no nutrition training, right? And yet almost all the diseases we treat, I mean, you're an internist, I'm a family doctor. Most of the diseases we treat, they are caused by our modern lifestyles, primarily the foods that we eat. All this metabolic syndrome, obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, cancer, dementia, stroke, the list goes on and on and on. It's the main cause is poor metabolic health caused by our current food environment, I would say. So it's just so fascinating to me that here we are, doctors with years and years of training, and we get no training in nutrition, which is the cause of all the diseases we treat. Like, that's why I'm passionate about this. That's why it's so freaking exciting to see, can we create something better? Because currently, we don't have anything good except perhaps new obesity drugs, which are, they're cool. Ozempic, quite effective. And really what we're building here with Hava and this satiety approach is, it's like Ozempic, but with food. It's like a natural version of it. Because as you know, these drugs, Ozempic and the like, they are satiety hormones, satiety drugs. Correct. And what we are building is a simple way to eat higher satiety foods. So instead of satiety drugs, talk about satiety foods. That's the simplest way to explain it, I think.
Yeah, no, that's a great explanation, I think. And where did that idea come from? Like, what originally got you so interested in? Because you've been doing this before Ozempic kind of blew up, right? I mean, I think I've seen you on Twitter for quite a while talking about the satiety concept here. So what was that insight that satiety was going to be? And I feel like that. Sorry, that insight is kind of backed up by the success of Ozempic, right? Is saying, hey, satiety is an important issue in the notion of regulation of eating.
It's like by far the most effective treatment we've ever seen. And what does it do? It tells the brain that you're full. It activates the satiety centers in the brain, makes the brain feel satiated, meaning feels like you've eaten enough, like you don't want to eat anymore. And then people eat less and voila, they lose lots of weight. And we have good evidence to suggest that food can have a similar effect. For example, we know that ultra-processed foods in general, as a group, on average, right, there are always exceptions, but as a group, they cause us to eat something like 500 or even 800 calories extra every day. We know this from very, very good studies that have been made, like one from 2019 by Kevin Hall and his co-workers, where they divided a group into two. One got ultra-processed foods and the other got unprocessed foods, and they were very carefully monitored, so they were eating exactly that. And the people who got the ultra-processed foods, they ate 500 calories extra every day, quickly gained weight and fat mass. And the other group ate 500 calories less and quickly lost weight and fat mass. Kind of almost like the opposite of Ozempic, if you will. Like these ultra-processed foods, they trick our brains into wanting to eat too much. It's like, you could say, in a sense, ultra-processed foods kind of trick our brains into eating too much. They become toxic after a while because of all the side effects of it. And then Ozempic might be seen as an antidote to this ultra-processed food environment that we're in. But I believe that we don't need to treat everybody with these drugs. And we can find simple ways to eat better, actually, that are not too challenging for people to do. Actually, quite easy. Actually, may not require much time at all. Like with our approach, arguably you can do it in less than a minute a day.
Oh, wow.
So
what is that approach? What does the app look like? If we interface with it, is it a tracking? You have to enter the foods you're eating or planning on eating?
Yeah, so that's the real nice thing is that, I mean, I think all nutrition apps up until now have been pretty terrible. And I should know because I've used most of them. And even though I'm a geek and I'm really into this stuff, I still find it challenging and boring to use them because it takes a lot of time and effort. Who wants to measure all the ingredients of what you're eating and the weights and then type it into an app? It's terrible. And how do you even do that when you're eating in a restaurant or at a friend's place? You don't even know what's in the food, so you're basically screwed. Or you're a freak if you try to do that while you're with your friends, right? But what if you could just take a picture of what you eat and have new super powerful AI just determine what's in it? And that's actually become possible now. So about a year ago, it started becoming possible. And so we've been working on it ever since. And we actually launched this in January, worked decently well in January. And then by the summer, it works even better. And now it's damn good. So yeah, you can download the Hava app and just take a picture of what you eat. And in a few seconds, you will have all the ingredients, the amounts, and then it automatically calculates calories, protein, carbohydrates, and a satiety score, which is the really innovative thing that we're doing, except for this AI stuff. And this means that, let's say you eat 3 times a day, just take 3 pictures. This is less than 1 minute of work. And then we give you feedback on what you eat, how it's working for you, and what you may want to eat more of and what you may want to eat less of. And that means, you don't have to like download a meal plan and go shopping and cook every little thing you eat from scratch. Organic foods cooked in your own kitchen. That's great. But who has the time really to do that for the rest of your life? That may be challenging for most people. I think for the people who can do it, amazing, right? It's perfect. But arguably, a lot of people want something simpler and they want to be able to eat the foods that they currently eat. But having a little bit more of some foods that you already eat that you like, and a little bit less of some foods that you don't really care that much about. I think that's pretty simple to do. So that's what we're going after.
That sounds really very innovative. It's interesting. Now, I guess the one thing that pops into my head, I'm picturing. So I recently lost 15 pounds. I was spent the last year and a half bulking up, building muscle, but along with that calorie excess came a bunch of fat. So over the last, I would say, maybe 8 months, off and on, I've done several cut periods using one of the standard calorie tracking apps. So I use
congratulations.
Carbon thank you.
That's impressive. I mean, using that approach, it's impressive.
It was an interesting experience, I would say. I think one of the things that kind of I certainly noticed is that if you adhere rigidly to a calorie restriction, you end up drifting, whether you like it or not, toward more whole foods, right? Because it's very difficult to fit a donut into a calorie restricted diet, right? Exactly. But the other thing I think I noticed is that the errors I think tend to filter out ultimately in some sense. So I don't know if I weighed the chicken once from my favorite, fajita restaurant. And ever after that, I used that number. I said, okay, it was 330 grams one time. I'll assume it's 330 grams forever after, right? But it does take the willingness to eat quite repetitively. That's the other challenge, is that, there were 4 or 5 days worth of food that I knew the calories and protein composition worked. And so unless I want the mental overhead of, as you said, adding up, calculating each and every time, I was stuck with one of those 5 days. I said, okay, is today the fajita day? Is today the Korean barbecue day? Or is it, and I was able to do that for a short burst, and that's fine. But yeah, I think a lot of people struggle with that. I know my own parents don't love that notion of just eating the same thing day and day after day after day.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, of course it works if you manage to find a way to get a calorie deficit with foods that you can actually sustain yourself on, then that's great. But it becomes repetitive, and if you don't find foods that make it easy to sustain that calorie deficit, if like you said, if you fit in a donut and you eat what you regularly eat, just try to eat less. Well, then you get the problem that now you're hungry, and then you get tired and miserable and cranky, and it's like, okay, are you gonna live your life feeling tired and miserable all the time? Probably not, right?
Sure.
So really, what all these calorie deficit approaches mean is that you'll have to figure out on your own what kind of foods you should eat, and then maybe do what you did, like you figure out a few of those days, and then you just repeat. I think that there is a much simpler way. So I think technology and this satiety approach can allow people to have much more flexibility, spend much less time obsessing over this, and also, and maybe most importantly, learn much faster and with much less effort. Like, there is a lot less knowledge required, because what we can do with new AI technologies is, like I mentioned, just take a picture of what you eat, but then also get AI feedback on it. Like, here's the effect it has, here's why, and here's how to improve for next time, right? And I think that can speed people's learning up by 10x or 100x, and require like 1% of the knowledge, basically requires no knowledge at all. You're just gonna spend a minute a day, and you're gonna have an expert to guide you 24/7 whenever you want it.
Yeah. Looping back around, the thought crossed my head. My one of my days was chicken fajita. I get the chicken fajitas for 2, and I would just eat the chicken and maybe half of the rice that it would come, because it's a serving for 2 people. I needed the protein, but I didn't need all the rest of it. How is that factored into the app? If it's just a picture, do you have to segment the part that you're planning to eat and then take a picture of that, or is there a way to kind of divide, hey, I'm only planning to eat half of the rice, or
whatever? So you can just take a picture of all of it, and then you can easily see the satiety scores of these foods. So we score it from 1 to 100, or 0 to 100, based on various properties of foods that we know are connected to how much satiety per calorie this food gives you. So this is the key thing, really, satiety per calorie, and that, I mean, I can explain that a little bit more later. But back to your question, you can then edit it if you want. If it's like, I'm not going to eat the rice, you just swipe left and it's disappeared. Or if you want to say, I want to eat half of it, you just click it and then change the number of grams to half and save and done, right? And then everything updates quickly. So it's a few extra seconds of work.
Okay, very cool. Let's double click on that. The notion of satiety per calorie. I think that's an interesting idea.
I think the thing that is challenging for a lot of people initially, I know it was for me, is to get your head around this idea of satiety per calorie. So satiety is like fullness, right? It's the feeling of feeling content and not hungry. And you can get to that feeling in various ways. You can just eat a pint or 2 of Ben and Jerry's ice cream, right? And you feel satiated, you feel really full. but you also had like 3,000 calories to get there. And that may not be so helpful if you want to, if losing weight is your goal, or being, shredded and ripped and all that stuff. That's not super helpful.
Right.
So the challenging thing is to get to that satiety level without having to eat a ton of calories. So then we're talking about satiety per calorie. You can get to satiety on any food, but some foods take you there with few calories, and some take you there with a lot of calories. So like the ultra-processed food example from these studies, they take you to satiety with a lot of calories. And the chicken fajita that you were talking about, where you mostly eat the chicken and the vegetables and a little bit less of the rice, well, that's higher satiety per calorie, more satiety per calorie. And what our app does is to make this super simple. You take a picture, or you search for a food or anything like that, and you can see what the score is. We sort of rank all common foods between 1 and 100. So 1 is the lowest, 100 is the highest. So what's a food that is at the lowest level? It turns out it's things like chocolate chip cookies. Not super good for satiety per calorie, and not super good for weight loss. What's at the top of the scale is perhaps not super surprising. You have lean proteins, you have green leafy vegetables, you have a lot of things like beans and lentils. Meat, fish, eggs, especially low fat versions of it are super high, though higher fat versions of those foods tend to score well as well. So I mean, certainly eat a
Sure.
ribeye, and that's pretty effective too. Just not
that's
quite as high, but like
sure. Because the
goal
calories are
isn't
more, right? I'm just trying to think that through as you're talking, right? Is if you have a lean cut of steak, right, then the protein, it'll be very satiating, right, and not super high in calories.
Yeah,
but
very satiating per calorie, right?
Per calorie, right? So then the ribeye may be even a little more satiating with a little more fat, but not enough to justify the calorie increase.
Exactly.
So the satiation per calorie is a little lower.
Exactly. That's the difference. That's the thing that trips people up all the time in the beginning, and it tripped me up in the beginning, because you think, well, I get more satiety, I feel more full by eating a ribeye instead of a leaner cut. Yes, you do.
Sure.
But you also get even more calories. So per calorie, the leaner cut is more effective. You're going to be a leaner person eating that. Not saying you have to, but if you want to take it to the extreme, is it a lean cut or is it ribeye? Or it's the lean cut.
Yeah. That notion per calorie, I think, starts to clarify things, right? Because then if you have that denominator, that factors into the score of the food. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I think that this is the stuff that trips people up. Like I said, so it takes a while to understand this for most people, but once you do, it really clarifies things, and I think it's super helpful, because all these other scoring systems are sort of per serving. You get your calories for a specific serving size, right? Or you have your Weight Watchers points or whatever. It's per a specific serving size. It means you cannot compare it to some other serving size. It's not like this chicken fajita thing always has the same point. It depends on how big the serving is. But the beautiful thing with this satiety per calorie scoring is it's, again, per calorie, meaning it stays the same. Whether you eat half a fajita or 10 fajitas, the quality is the same, the satiety per calorie is the same. It means you will always know that this kind of food is taking me in this direction, that kind of food is taking me in that direction. I don't have to count, I don't have to measure. I can just know that, well, let's see, a boiled egg scores 60 on our scale. Well, that's pretty good. Anything above 50 is good to be, if you want to be lean and healthy. Then I can just eat boiled eggs whenever I want. And it's all great. I don't need to count it.
Interesting. So Is the main focus here improving overall metabolic health through weight control? Is that the primary plan for the app here?
Yes, I would say it is.
And I think Ozempic justifies, or the success of Ozempic justifies that approach, right? We are seeing reductions in mortality risk. We are seeing reductions in cardiovascular risk. So, I mean,
Yeah,
it would make
predictably,
sense.
like
I'm just,
everything
yeah,
improves once you get rid of excess abdominal fat, excess
sure.
belly fat. Then your blood sugar improves, your blood pressure improves, your cholesterol profile improves, your risk of heart disease plummets, your risk of diabetes plummets, your risk of dementia goes down, risk of cancer, most cancer forms, or several big cancer forms at least, go down a lot over time. And yeah, basically the risk of all our top chronic diseases, all the things that kill people prematurely, go way down if you stay at a normal weight or approach normal weight.
Sure. I think that makes sense. So I just wanted to make sure let's say, and I'm just now speculating here, let's say I invent a new food and it's a highly processed food somehow, however we're going to, but it is very satiating per calorie, right? Um, does the app have a bias toward unprocessed or toward keto or toward low carb, or is it pretty much just whatever the satiety per calorie is? Is that the only thing that's baked into the app? And then it happens to end up that most unprocessed foods are better for that.
Yeah, the latter. So
Okay.
what I mean is we try to be not biased as much as
Mm-hmm.
we can be unbiased. We're all only humans, but we do our best. We try to be
Sure.
guided by first principles. We try to make this an agnostic approach. We don't want to
Mm-hmm.
be in any religious sort of diet camp here. You can actually do this approach if you are a carnivore, like you eat only meat, but you
Mm-hmm.
could perhaps do it just as easily if you're a vegan, fully
Okay.
plant-based. You can do this in a low carb way, or you can do this in a low fat way with plenty of carbohydrates. There are, like I mentioned, there are multiple factors, right? There's the protein percentage, the fiber content of food, the energy density, and also the sort of addictive nature of foods, or what we call the hedonic
Mm.
factor, which is caused by combinations of certain things, especially energy dense combinations of fat and sugar together, like chocolate or ice cream, or energy dense combinations of and sugar, fat and carbohydrates like potato chips, especially when combined with salt. So
Mm.
salted potato chips, well, even more addictive in their
Mm.
effect. Or you can think of things like salted nuts tend to drive you to eat a bit more than unsalted nuts. So
Sure.
all these factors into this formula that calculates this, predicts this satiety per calorie score.
That's fascinating. I mean, so maybe double clicking on this imaginary example here. If I invent a new food somehow, how would you go about determining the satiety index of that food or the satiety per calorie?
Yeah, we simply base it on these properties of the food. We feed them into this algorithm, and out comes a prediction of the satiety per calorie ranking of it. And of course, our algorithm is always going to be a work in progress, because we're trying to be as scientific and unbiased as we can. It means that any new evidence that comes out, any new randomized controlled trials in humans where we compare two different diets, if it's sort of surprising, if our algorithm cannot predict it and it's a quality study with plenty of power, then we
Hmm.
would try to tweak our algorithm, if justified, to better account for all the data, including this new study. So back to your example, okay, an ultra processed food that score high on satiety per calorie, maybe it's got lots of protein, for example. That's something that sometimes
Sure.
is added to processed foods. I think that the best example of this may be certain protein powders with some sweeteners and other additives can score as a ultra processed, highly processed food, and
Yeah.
yet they do tend to get a very high satiety score in our ranking because they are high protein, they're low in sugar and carbohydrates and fat, and they tend to be not too addictive in their nature. Of course, with sweeteners added, they can have a little bit of that effect, but not too much.
Sure.
So, yeah, they tend to score quite high. For example, even though they may score a Nova Class 4 ultra processed classification.
Sure. That's fascinating. I like the sort of as you said, the not in any particular camp, just the sort of, hey, look, we're focusing on satiety as the mechanism, and if someone has a pre-existing preference for a vegan diet or a carnivore diet for other reasons, then that will be worked.
Yeah, it's quite simply focused on which foods make you eat more and which foods make you eat less, and then guiding people generally towards foods that make you eat less, because let's face it, we're in a world in the US at least. You're leading us towards the future here as well, right? So you probably know 93% of adult Americans have poor metabolic health in some way. They don't achieve normal metabolic health markers, including waist circumference, blood pressure, blood sugar, and not having heart disease and such. So that's just 7% of the adult population are in the normal range for all these core numbers. And when looking at people at 50 years of age and above, it's only 3% that classify as normal. That's pretty insane. So in a world like that, the way I see it, there are really two options. Two options to not have this be disastrously bad for people's health. And option one is just to medicate almost everybody for life. Like almost everybody would need these new GLP-1s, Ozempic-like medications, and also probably various other medications for blood pressure and statins and so forth, right? The other option would be to find a way to eat better, because the cause is we're all being poisoned by the new industrial food supply, this new ultra-processed food supply. And we need to eat better in some way. Or some combination of both. Ideally, it would be a combination of both, I guess. Like medications for people who need it, and then eating better for anybody who wants to make an effort and improve.
Yeah, and I liked what you said about the, certainly as I was doing this cut recently, the protein shakes that I used were lifesaver to just be, okay, I need to, I'm still lifting, I still want to hit these protein targets on my macros, and they are quite satiating. So it validates my experience subjectively, I suppose, that, the protein shakes would be filling and help me hit the goal without having too many calories.
Absolutely. I think they are like a bit of a cheat code, really, if you think of it like a computer game.
Yeah.
It's almost too easy when you use it.
That's right.
But I mean, you could try our app and see how it predicts every experience you had that you want to check. I mean, the chicken fajitas, I think, is a good example. If you reduce the rice, for sure, the number is going to go up. For example, chicken scores high, for sure.
Sure.
I mean, everybody knows that, right? Everybody knows that you lose weight by eating chicken and broccoli. That's not a surprise. It's just too boring. You need something else too.
It's a bit repetitive. It does get a bit repetitive, for sure. So you mentioned, I think, something really interesting on the notion of this hedonic score of food, especially in the notion of synergistic effects. Now, do you see any synergistic effects in the satiety as a whole? Meaning, is there a difference between eating, for instance, chicken and rice versus just the chicken or just the rice? Do those scores interact between themselves?
Yeah, if you combine ingredients that are both high fat and high carb, that tends to be more hedonic, drive more eating. So, and it's also the fact, but this actually we haven't really found a way to incorporate yet in our system. Maybe we will.
That's fair.
Yeah, but it's clear that eating in a very repetitive way, very plain and bland, and no variety, only the same things, that tends to lead to eating less as well. And the more variety you add,
Mm-hmm.
the more excitement and new flavors and new textures and new everything, like a buffet, right? You will always eat a little bit more
Sure.
on average. But that we actually do not factor in yet. So it's going to be an interesting challenge in the future to maybe tweak it a little bit for that as well, if we
Yeah.
can find a good way.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, one of the people I like to follow online is Dr. Mike Isertel. He's a bodybuilder and health weightlifting educator. And he talks about for his recommendations for people that are trying to cut weight for bodybuilding and that kind of thing is he specifically says, eat blander foods, eat less interesting foods because you'll eat less of them. Right. And so, but that's also a challenging instruction. That's,
Yeah.
but I think maybe for a bodybuilder.
This kind of effect, I would argue, is really it's really for the total overachievers. Like if you're a bodybuilder and you want to compete and you want to be at an insane, inhumanly low body fat percentage, then maybe you have to pull those levers too. But I think for 99.9% of normal people, actually adding more spices and flavors can be quite helpful to make more nutritious food still interesting, right?
Yeah.
If you're looking for a higher protein, higher fiber food, maybe it can be less exciting to start out with, and then having lots of interesting spices and flavors can help make that still enjoyable.
Yeah, I think that's one of the ideas that kind of just comes up as I'm reflecting here is this notion, is there such a thing as perhaps psychological satiety that's separate from the notion of physiologic satiety, that maybe I need some variety in my life, the feeling of having spices, the feeling of having interesting food that's a bit independent of how filling that food actually is in some sense.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right that pretty much all of us, we need some excitement in our lives, even when it comes to food. Food is one of the great pleasures and joys of life. So living life without that would be pretty terrible, I think, for most people.
But even if your app just helps us quantify just the physiologic piece of that, would still be very valuable to say, okay, you know what, today I need whatever, my donut, right? And I understand that I'm eating something that has a low physiologic satiety score, but this is the one day in the month that I'm having one, a donut or whatever for the psychological variety.
Absolutely. And I think that as long as people are not addicted to these foods, so that having one of them makes you perhaps likely to eat 10 and then 100, then it's not a good thing. Like if you're an alcoholic, you wouldn't say, well, just have one drink, you need to have some fun in life. No, you really do not, right, want to do that if you're addicted. So it's really the same thing with food. If you're addicted to foods and you have health conditions because of it, and it is actually making your life much, much worse, then abstinence from those foods is probably best. But for everybody who's not addicted, I think that's absolutely reasonable. Maybe sometimes you want to eat cookies that your kids cooked for you. Of course you do, right? Most, who wouldn't want that? That's also part of joys of life. And and if you make some of these exceptions, then maybe it can be good. And you still want to have an excellent health and an excellent and feel your best and look your best and just be the best version of yourself that makes you happy and content. And then you maybe want to eat more nutritious in other meals and make sure you get enough protein and fiber and all these things in some other meal when maybe it doesn't really matter so much to you. You can just as well eat this, and then you have a little bit more leeway other times when you're eating with your family or you're out with friends or you want to have it's a special day for whatever reason, right?
For sure.
You can make up for it other times, and still reach your goals.
I love that. So the last main question I have actually is I think more and more what I see with AI, with the advent of algorithms, with the advent of these, what I call chains of reasoning, is that in the end, many of them may not play out the way we expect. And so I always have this question to say, hey, if we just take the app as a whole, as it is, or whatever is being done, we just treat that as a black box. And we say, oh, I don't know what's happening there, but it's giving me a score. However it's giving it, and I'm eating according to its recommendations. Is there a way to study the efficacy of the app as an intervention, almost as if it's a drug? I say, I don't know what the mechanism of action is. I don't care. But if it's effective, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. We just try to follow up on the data from the people using it. So we're going to have more and more ability to gather data in the app, but primarily perhaps do people lose weight? How much weight do they lose if they have weight to lose? And that's their goal. I mean, then we can follow up and track that to the extent that people use it and benefit from it. We will have more and more validation of how effective this is. So currently, we're mostly basing it on existing high-level human trials, like randomized controlled trials of various diets. And these components of our scoring, I would argue, are pretty well validated, especially when it comes to protein, energy density, and fiber. Tons and tons of evidence to support that has a clear effect. And we also know that ultra-processed foods has a certain effect compared to unprocessed foods, and this tends to correlate very well with our scoring as well, on average. Then it comes to this addictive hedonic scoring. There we don't have as much evidence as we would like, but there is at least suggestive evidence to say that our approach seems reasonable. And I think that any human who's tried eating these foods, they know what kind of effect they have. That you can be full after a meal, but you can still have some ice cream. I don't think that's super controversial to say that these combinations, fat and sugar and salt together in various combinations, there is something that happens there, and avoiding it makes us eat less. I think that's reasonable to make that assumption. So I would argue that the main uncertainty that remains is to what extent can we build an app that's so simple and delightful and helpful and just fun, so that people actually use it and that it actually helps them improve their eating habits. And that's the thing we're still working on, tracking and validating. And of course, primarily improving it, making it simpler, faster, more fun, all these things. So I think we made enormous improvements from when we launched in January up until now. But there's so much more to come. So I'm very excited.
No, it's exciting.
Actually, in December, we're going to have some really interesting new functionality where we get AI coach feedback on what you're eating and suggestions for how to improve it in real time, almost like within seconds.
Oh, very nice. We'll look forward to that. Looping back for just a moment, something that occurred. What if foods look alike? How does the AI, so for instance, and the reason I thought of this, we were talking about ice cream. I recently purchased a Ninja Creamy, which is, I don't know if you're familiar, it's a device that makes ice cream, but it can make ice cream from almost anything that can be frozen solid. So I just freeze the protein shakes, basically, and then it will make it into ice cream. But it looks and tastes a lot like ice cream.
That's a real cheat code. That's a real cheat code.
Yeah. No, very much so, right? Extremely low calorie, high protein. I can barely eat a serving, actually, because it's so satiating. And has
how good is it? It's
quite good, actually.
Like a 5 out of 10, or is it 8 out of 10? What would you say?
I'll give it a good 6 out of 10. It's not the best ice cream I've ever had by any means, and certainly I'm adding xanthan gum and guar gum to kind of affect smooth the texture, so it's not as icy as a protein shake would be otherwise. So I'm manipulating the texture somewhat artificially.
Because I tried this, putting protein powder and frozen berries and some milk in a mixer, and I mean, you get something that is similar to ice cream. I kind of like it, but then I try to give it to my family, and they're like, "No, we're not having that."
Yeah. If you get a chance to try the Ninja Creamy, it's an interesting technology just because the part of the texture, the flavor, or the experience of ice cream is the size of the crystal, and the way they've shaped the blade and the way it's done, it really creates a very, very fine crystal. Yeah, it's an interesting thing to play around with for sure in terms of cheat codes and just restructuring a food into, you take a protein shake but make it ice cream. It's interesting.
Yeah, I think that's part of what we're trying to make simple with our app, so that people don't have to make this whole journey of discovery during months and years potentially, but maybe they can do it in days and weeks instead. So,
sure.
And I think it's all about what you said. You want some of these delicious foods, but maybe you can be okay with something that is like a 7 or 8 out of 10. It doesn't have to be the absolute greatest every time.
Sure.
Like not every day at least.
And when you take a picture with the app, how does it account for like if you're eating low fat ice cream versus the full fat, whatever, or let alone my sort of creamy kind of thing? Is there a way to tell the app, hey, or override the macros? Or
you can of course edit it, edit the ingredients afterwards. Okay. What it does is it gives you what it predicts to be most likely.
Okay, so that's fair.
It's not just image recognition. That's why it's so much better than what people may have experienced a few years ago. It's just image recognition, but you can only make out so much from an image. The real magic happens because it's connected to a large language model which has been trained on the whole internet and knows every recipe on the internet. That's like millions of recipes. So it knows what's likely to be inside foods that looks like this. So that means that if your recipe is kind of in line with what's common, then it's eerily accurate. But if you're using some special ingredient that you cannot see and that is not typically in that recipe, then it's not gonna pick that up.
As long as there's an option to override
it, manually later in that case.
Sure, and as long as that option is there, right? In the sense that, like, hey, if it gets 95% of the food I'm eating very easily, and then 5% I'm eting something wacky, that I have to override. That's not too much.
We actually started developing this so that it would, based on your preferences, it would sort of try to predict where you tend to use ingredients that are atypical because of your history. We're not quite there yet. Turned out to be a little bit trickier than we thought, but that is definitely coming. It's just a question of time. So that means that as you use it, if you keep correcting it and it keeps learning your habits, it will start predicting what's likely to be inside of your food, and not just average foods that looks like this, but more like, okay, when Hakim's food looks like this, then this is what's likely to be inside it. So that's being planned. Or we're exploring it. It's coming.
Very, very cool. Well, you said you launched in January, so this app is live. It's available in the app stores. Google
free
and
to download,
Apple,
free to try it out.
Okay. And then is there a yearly subscription after that, or is that the usual model?
Yeah, you can use it for free forever, but if you want all the functionality, unlimited AI support and all that stuff, then it's cheap, like Netflix or Spotify subscription, that kind of thing.
Perfect. Well, very cool. I appreciate the time. Thanks so much for coming on, and I think it's a fascinating idea. I love the notion of kind of replicating Ozempic effect with a little bit of knowledge and data that I don't have to have in my head because it's in the app. So
I'm just fascinated that nobody's done this before. Like, why? It seems to me the more I work with this, the more I feel like, obviously this is the way it should be done. So why is nobody else doing it? I don't know, but at least we are.